They have been standing in the dark for more than 2,000 years, rank behind rank, shoulder to shoulder, an entire army pressed into the earth and left to wait. And when you finally see them all at once, the first thing that reaches you is not the scale of it, it is the silence. This is the Terracotta Army, thousands of life-sized clay soldiers buried in tight military formation in the countryside near the city of Xi'an in central China. Historians know they were made for one man, Huang, the king of Qin, who, in 221 BCE, finished conquering the warring states around him and made himself the first emperor of a single, unified China. And this buried army was his. Historians know it was built as a funerary guard, soldiers for the emperor's afterlife, arranged in formation around his burial complex, so that the power he held in life would stand watch around him in death. Look closely, and they are almost unsettlingly real. The figures are roughly life-sized, most of them standing between about 1 3/4 and 2 meters tall, taller than the average person of their own era, with the highest ranking figures built tallest of all. Each has an individual face, individual armor, individual hands, and every one of them is looking the same way. Evidence suggests the army faces east, out toward the lands of the rival states the Qin had spent a lifetime subduing. The most likely reading is that they were set to guard the emperor, in death, against the very world he had swallowed in life. But here is the strange part. Everything you are about to see, the thousands of soldiers, the horses, the weapons, the workshops that made them, all of it was built to guard something. And that something, the tomb at the very center of this complex, has never been opened. Not by grave robbers, not by archaeologists, not by anyone. The army faces outward, holding a line around a door no one has walked through. This is the story of everything we can see, and the one thing at the center that we still cannot. For most of those 2,000 years, no one knew the army was there at all, and the story of how it came back to the world begins not with a scholar or an emperor, but with a drought. In March 1974, in the dry countryside east of Xi'an, a group of farmers were digging a well, hunting for water. A few meters down, their tools struck something that was neither rock nor soil, fired clay, fragments of it, and then, unmistakably, the shape of a human head. One of the men working that well was a farmer named Zhifa, and historians credit him as among the well diggers who made the find. It is worth pausing on that because it is genuinely rare. One of the greatest archaeological sites on Earth was rediscovered inside living memory by ordinary people looking for water. No scholars, no camera, no warning. Word reached the authorities and archaeologists came, and when they began to dig in earnest, the ground gave up something no one had imagined. Historians know the excavations revealed 3 main pits filled with figures. The largest, Pit 1, is estimated to hold around 6,000 infantry alone, rank after rank of them standing in long corridors of earth. And beyond the soldiers, the wider necropolis held stranger things still, pits of bronze chariots, of bronze birds, of acrobats, and court officials. The farmers had not found a statue or a buried shrine. They had found the front rank of an entire underground world, and no one yet knew how deep it went. In the years that followed, a museum rose over the pits, and this quiet stretch of farmland became one of the most visited sites on the planet. To understand what the emperor actually built, you first have to learn to read the ground itself. Historians know this mausoleum was not thrown up in a hurry. Construction is thought to have begun around 246 BCE, when the future emperor first took the throne of Qin as a boy king. It continued through his reign past his death in 210 BCE and was still unfinished around 208 BCE, when rebellion finally tore the dynasty apart. That is most of a lifetime poured into a single tomb. The scale of the labour is hard to grasp. According to later tradition, the historian Xi'an writing about a century afterward, recorded that some 700,000 conscripted labourers worked on the emperor's mausoleum. That figure comes from a single ancient text, not the archaeology, and many historians read it as rhetorical rather than literal. But even taken with caution, it points to a project of almost unimaginable size. And what has been dug out so far is only a fraction. Evidence suggests the full army may number around 8,000 figures, of which only about 2,000 have so far been excavated. Both of those are estimates, projected from the density of the pits already opened. The rest still lie in the earth, and they are being left there, deliberately. Because here the archaeology does something you might not expect. Historians know that Pit 2, with its cavalry and its massed archers, has been left largely unexcavated on purpose. The diggers have chosen, in effect, to stop digging. Conservation now leads the excavation rather than trailing behind it, a decision whose full reasons will matter enormously by the end of this story. The soil preserves the architecture too. The pits were roofed corridors of rammed earth, and archaeologists read the collapsed timbers and the packed layers to reconstruct how the ranks once stood. Each pit tells a different part of the plan. Evidence suggests that Pit 3, the smallest of them, holding only around 68 figures and a single chariot, arranged quite unlike the massed ranks elsewhere, was the army's command post, and yet no supreme commander has ever been found inside it. Archaeologists read it as a headquarters left deliberately empty at the very top, as though the only commander who mattered lay elsewhere. In the tomb this army surrounded, there is even a fourth pit. Historians know it was dug and found empty, backfilled with plain soil, holding no figures at all. The most likely explanation is that it was simply left unfinished when the dynasty collapsed and the workers vanished, though some argue it was only ever a trench dug to extract soil. Either way, it is a quiet reminder that this vast machine stopped one day in mid-sentence. Step down among the figures, though, and the army stops being a mass and becomes individuals. Here is a kneeling archer, one of the best preserved figures ever recovered, balanced on one knee, hands poised to draw a bow that rotted away long ago. Turn to the sole of his raised foot, and you find the tread carefully modelled line by line on a surface no living eye was meant to see. Nearby stands a second archer, upright, caught in a different phase of the same motion. A cavalryman waits beside his saddled horse. A general stands apart, his rank readable in the layered plates of his armour and the very set of his shoulders. And not every figure here is even a soldier. Evidence suggests the complex also held civil officials and acrobats and strongmen, the entertainers of a court, being carried whole into the afterlife, and no two of their faces are exactly alike. This is the detail that has made the Terracotta Army famous, and it is also, quietly, where the story is most often told wrong. It is tempting to say each face was modelled on a real, living soldier, that these are 10,000 individual portraits of named men, but evidence suggests that is not what happened. The figures were built from standardized mold-made parts, legs, torsos, arms and heads produced in bulk and then assembled in shifting combinations. A limited kit of components mixed and matched, then finished by hand. A craftsman adding an ear, a moustache, the line of a mouth, until the same few moulds yielded what looks like endless variety. They are individualized types, not proven portraits of named men. The genius was never in carving 10,000 individuals one by one. It was in designing a system that could manufacture individuality itself at industrial scale. And we know it was a system because the workers signed it. Evidence suggests that many figures carry inscribed or stamped marks, the names of foremen and of workshops, pressed into the clay in places they were never meant to be seen. It is the fingerprint of an organized, accountable production line, quality control, 22 centuries early. That same standardization runs straight through the weapons. Historians know that tens of thousands of bronze arrowheads, sword blades, and crossbow fittings have been recovered from the pits. Evidence suggests they were made to near interchangeable specifications. The trigger of one crossbow could serve another. The arrowheads ground to a common form. The figures were each individual, but their weapons were mass-produced to a tolerance a modern factory would recognize. There is one famous claim about those weapons that has to be handled carefully, because it is usually told backwards. You may have heard that the bronze blades were deliberately coated in chromium, an anti-rust treatment thousands of years ahead of its time. One theory once argued exactly that, but a 2019 study found the thin film of chromium is most likely accidental, contamination that migrated from the lacquer nearby, and that the bronze survived so well for a far simpler reason: the alkaline soil it lay in. The preservation was in the chemistry of the ground, not in a lost ancient technology. The craftsmanship reached well beyond the soldiers too. Historians know that one pit held suits of armour and helmets built from thousands of small limestone plates, laced together. Armour of solid stone, far too heavy and brittle to ever be worn, made not for any battle but for the afterlife. And near the tomb itself lay two half-size bronze chariots, each assembled from thousands of separately cast parts, fitted with gold and silver, with working reins and a raised parasol, among the most complex bronzes to survive from the ancient world. Another pit, further out, held bronze waterfowl, cranes, swans, and geese, set along a modelled watercourse, a whole riverside cast in metal. This was never simply an army, it was an entire world, cast and fired and buried, so that one man would lack for nothing on the other side. And there is one more thing we have to unsee. In almost everyone's imagination, the Terracotta Army is grey, the flat colour of bare, weathered clay. It never was. Historians know the figures were painted. Everyone was finished in bright colour, laid over a fine ground layer of lacquer, deep reds, greens, and blues, and among them a manufactured pigment we now call Han purple, a synthetic colour the Qin workshops were producing through a chemistry that would not be understood again for 2,000 years. When they were first sealed into the earth, this was not a grey army at all. It was a riot of colour, thousands strong. Almost none of that colour survived the return to the light, and the reason is cruel in its simplicity. Evidence suggests that when a figure is lifted from the damp ground, the lacquer layer beneath its paint, suddenly starved of the moisture that had held it for millennia, begins to dry and to curl and to flake within a matter of minutes. The paint does not gently fade across years. It lifts and falls away almost as you watch, and some of the first figures raised from the pits lost their painted surfaces within moments of meeting the air. That is a large part of why the digging slowed. The figures you see in the museum today are, for the most part, the grey survivors of that loss, and the few precious fragments of surviving pigment, the reds and purples that somehow clung on, are now guarded like the treasures they are. Historians know the colour was there, the ground had kept it, and the open air took it back. And this is the lesson the archaeologists learned the hard way, the lesson that quietly changed everything that came after. Because if a painted archer can be lost in the few minutes it takes to lift him out of the earth, then what, exactly, happens to a whole buried palace the moment it first meets the air? Which brings us back, at last, to the mound. Rising above the flat farmland east of Xi'an is a low, green, wooded hill, the kind of gentle rise you might walk straight past without a second glance. It is not natural. Beneath it lies the burial mound of the first emperor, and beneath that, his tomb. And historians know one thing about that tomb above all else. It has never been opened. In more than 2,000 years, through dynasties, invasions, and a full century of modern archaeology, no one has entered the central chamber. We are not completely without a description of what might lie inside. According to later tradition, the historian Sima Qian, writing roughly 100 years after the emperor's death, described a tomb of extraordinary ambition. Palaces and towers recreated underground, the heavens themselves painted across the ceiling, and the great rivers and seas of the empire modelled below in flowing mercury, engineered somehow to move across a map of the world. But these are the words of a single text, written a century after the fact, later tradition, and not established fact. And yet, there is one detail the Earth itself seems to echo. Historians know that when scientists surveyed the soil above the mound, they found something strange. An anomaly in the mercury readings far above the natural background and concentrated directly over the tomb. Evidence suggests that pattern is consistent with, though it does not confirm, a large quantity of buried mercury beneath the mound, exactly where the ancient account says the rivers ought to be. Consistent with, not proof. Because the only way to know for certain would be to open the tomb, and no one will. Why not? It is not superstition, and it is not the mercury. The most likely explanation is far quieter and far more honest. Current technology cannot yet safely preserve whatever might be inside, and modern Chinese heritage policy deliberately favours preservation over excavation, digging only when there is genuinely no other option. And the reason they know to be this careful is, in the end, the colour. They watched the paint flake from the soldiers in minutes. They will not risk doing the same to whatever waits inside that chamber, not until they can be certain of saving it. So the tomb stays sealed. Historians know the wider complex around it was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987, and that it remains, to this day, an active excavation, still giving up new pits and figures with almost every passing decade. The story is not finished. It is simply being told slowly and carefully, with a patience the first emperor himself would never have understood. We have spent this entire film on what can be seen, the faces, the ranks, the weapons, the lost colour. But the army was never actually built to be looked at. It was built to face outward and to hold a line around a single door. 2,000 years later, it is still holding it against us.